special meeting. Was not that you only had a few days' notice. I'm hoping today, there's only one agenda item. It's the motion that was deferred, and it includes a wholesome, hopefully, discussion, and I'm hoping everyone will participate, about what we can do to function as well as we can and still cover off all the parts of our mandate. And I'd just like everyone to be conscious of the fact, the legal standing of this committee and composition. So we are a group of community members, including Councillor Shell and I mean, that's what councillors are community members who are elected to represent. You are appointed by the nominations committee as community members to discuss all the aspects of the committee mandate, which is in your package, right? And the committee mandate was updated with the transition that we went through in 2015, and that is also in your package. That's the first 5 pages. So Schedule B4 advisory committees, it lays it all out. This is the language that staff follows when work is brought to us. And the motion essentially is asking us to examine certain aspects of not only our mandate, but our procedures. So that's what the discussion is about. And I'll just read out the motion. So it's moved by, right, oh yes. Sorry, I forgot, we still have to follow the regular proceedings. So the approval of the agenda with the one item, I need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Shell, seconded by Paul. Any proposed changes? I mean, the agenda is essentially a result of the motion by Paul at the last meeting to have the special meeting for this purpose, so we can't really alter it. All right, all those in favor? And that carries, thank you. No minutes? There's no minutes to confirm any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. There are no presentations, delegations, or briefings. You've heard my little introductory framing remarks about how it is that we come to be here, and now I'm going to read the motion. So moved by Don and seconded by Peter. Whereas the Heritage Kingston Committee has been operational for more than a year and it is appropriate to review its functioning and effectiveness, and whereas essentially all of the business of the committee since inception has been concerned with applications for built heritage alteration permits, according to the Ontario Heritage Act, which only a minority of committee members have the interest and the expertise to deal with, and whereas lengthy meetings dealing with items of little significance to many members have led to attendance and quorum problems and the prospect of multiple resignations, and whereas members of the committee, the public, and the community heritage groups have expressed concerns that the city's procedures relating to alteration permit applications are not protecting the city's built heritage as required by the Ontario Heritage Act, and that revisions are needed to provide consistency with provincial guidelines and with practices in other municipalities and to provide more support and assistance to heritage property owners. Therefore, be it resolved that Heritage Kingston recommends that City Council directs staff to undertake a review of the composition, mandate, and procedures of Heritage Kingston, and for this purpose, to strike a working group to be recommended by the Nominations Committee, comprising of a member of Heritage Kingston, a heritage planner, a former member of Kingston's Municipal Heritage Committee, a member with experience of Heritage Committee operation in a different municipality, a member with experience of civic museums and collections, and a member of the public, to review to include the following components. 1, to hold one or more open meetings where members of the public and representatives of interested community groups are invited to make presentations and provide input. 2, to evaluate the city's current procedures relating to applications for built heritage alteration permits under the Ontario Heritage Act for effectiveness and for consistency with provincial and federal guidelines and with procedures in other Ontario municipalities. 3, to recommend committee restructuring and mandates to allow the provision of advice more effectively to council on matters relating to the protection of the city's built heritage in accordance with requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act, to the city's museums and civic collections, and to general cultural heritage issues of interest to the city. 4, to recommend procedures for dealing with heritage permit applications for properties designated under Part 4 and Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, including procedures for approval under delegated authority that allow more efficient time utilization for both heritage staff and committee members. Okay. Well, it's been read in. I will open the floor for discussion in a moment. Just to remind all members that if this is a broad topic, so many things will be in order, but I may feel required to interrupt at time if we start talking about aspects that are not relevant to this motion. Yes, Councillor Shaw.
Yes, I did ask the clerk, thank you. I asked the clerk about how we would proceed on this. And normally under our agenda, it's delegations and briefings. And I understand that procedurally we could allow delegations, but my question had been, could members of the public address the motion? So I understand, maybe the clerk could,
yes,
clerk
maybe
could,
the city clerk
explain.
is here. Are members of the public permitted to address the committee on this motion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's a special meeting of the committee. All the provisions from regular meetings also apply. This is a little different that it's really internal to the committee, but if there are people that want to speak to that particular motion, that is allowable.
Okay, so we'll be following the regular procedures, which means we can ask questions of staff first. If you get into, we're going to have that section, but if you get into, well, let's just go like that. Does anyone have any questions of clarification before we get into debate? Yes, Paul.
My one question is, are we going to be speaking only of this motion? We're not here to speak about what this motion's asking to do. That could be happening at this working group or committee that's struck. We're only talking about the motion itself. Is that correct?
I think the answer is yes. Yes, and that's if you're asking me as chair. Like I said, I only want I wanted us to restrict our conversation to exactly what's in front of us. But if anyone has any legal questions or procedural questions that are for staff, now would be the time before we get started. Yes, Patricia.
I'm still a little confused. So does that mean right now we can't add another whereas, or we can't discuss things we think are missing from the motion?
So that's part of the debate, and Dawn will speak first to the motion specifically when we start debate, but I wanted all questions about procedure and legal aspects to be covered before we start the debate. Does anyone have any? Yes.
Thank you. It relates to the motion, but it also, I understand, is something that we have done. So maybe it should be when we have the discussion or now. When it discusses evaluating the city's current procedures relating to applications. So this is part 2 under resolved. I believe that the city has already done that. When we created the mandate for this new committee, we had already evaluated what other cities do in quite a long report, if I remember.
Peter. So then the question to staff would be, if passed, does this clause represent, how does it match up with that work that's already been done?
So as the committee is aware, we spent 2.5 years reviewing the committee and came up with a process whereby we focused heritage on what it should be, whether it's built heritage, cultural heritage, history, and whatnot. So that work has already happened. Council has made that decision. Council has directed how this committee should operate. So to put something like that in there almost makes a guise that work hasn't happened and that work did occur. So just to get back to a bit of process on here, as I understand it, the committee is going to discuss the merits of the motion that's within the agenda. Anything that's in the recommendation is basically something that can be discussed. At the end of the day, we'll see where we're going to go with this, but the idea that council has made the decision on how they want Heritage Kingston to operate. It's been just over a year. To then go back in time to review that, in my mind, isn't going to change the way this committee is going to operate. If there's if there are some people that are thinking that to vote in support of this motion is going to move the agenda forward, whether it be for cultural built heritage, that is not going to happen. And so the debate should focus on what's in the recommendation and solely on the recommendation, to presuppose that there's going to be a working group composed of individuals as outlined in the motion. That's not going to happen unless council makes that decision. So today's meeting is really to take a look at the motion, which was properly put together. However, the ramifications of what might come out of the motion may not be what the committee thinks is going to happen. Council is not going to separate culture from built heritage. And the two councilors can speak to that, but it is my view, based on the report which went forward and the council debate, that that isn't something that's going to happen.
Thank you. So the council shall still has the floor.
Thank you. And actually, this also repeats with item number 2. I've put a little "done" after it. To evaluate the city's current procedures relating to applications for built heritage application permits under the Ontario Heritage Act for effectiveness and consistency with provincial. I believe we already did that as well in the review that was done before this committee got its new mandate.
Through the chair, that is correct. So that has already taken place. And as I indicated previously, council's made the decision on how they want Heritage Kingston to function. So to review that and possibly suggest we're going to get a different response, that's not going to come from staff.
Okay, Patricia?
I'd just like to add a point of clarification. Now, as an evaluator for many years myself, whenever you have a new initiative or you're doing something different, you want to stop and say, okay, how are we doing? So I would say, I think number 3, according to Liz and the gentleman back there, is correct, in that what we should be evaluating is not the committee structure and mandate, which has been done and set already. What we should be evaluating is it achieving its objectives? And so I think it's a question of not seeing what an evaluation is. And so you wouldn't evaluate which is already done, but you want to evaluate, is it achieving the objectives it achieved? What kind of results are we producing? That's what, from a technical evaluator's point of view, that's what you'd be looking at.
I understand what you mean, because we have that in the nursing process, the evaluation stage. Before we go any further, though, that was borderline getting into the debate, so I think it really should start the debate now. Unless you have a direct question to a staff member about the language or the legislation or anything like that. That's the only thing I'll allow at this point. Yes, Paul?
When I was looking at this motion, I agree that a review after a year is a good thing. But one thing that really stood out to me was in the 4th whereas, it says we're not protecting cities' built heritage as required by the Heritage Act. Are we not legally following what we're supposed to do? Can city clarify that? Can staff?
So the 4th whereas clause is not, the whereases are not direction. The question is the language in there accurate? Yes.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So just in terms of, we put together some summarizing information, and I know some of this came forward in your chair's report a few months ago, just in terms of looking at some of the work that's been completed by this committee in the time since the mandate has changed, and in reference to what was accomplished in previous years of the committee. So I can present some information related to built heritage specifically. Dr. Jennifer can speak to some information related to cultural heritage, but in reviewing it, preparing for this meeting, in the last couple of years, we've done more work related to Part 4 designations and listings of property than was previously done in 4 or 5 years of the committee. So in 2017 so far, we did 16 Part 4 designations. We have 9 more that are currently in progress and 13 other properties that were listed. In 2016, we did 5 Part 4 designations, 136 listings, and we finished the update to the Berryfield Conservation District Plan. And this compares with numbers in 2012, 2013, where we did 1 Part 4 listing, 2 Part 4 listings, and a designation in 2013, as well as some work in terms of certainly the Sydenham Conservation District Plan. So on the designation front, we've certainly done a tremendous amount of work in the last couple of years, more than has previously been done by this committee. And we've also processed this, at the same time, we're nearing 100 alteration permits by this committee. We did 100 in 2016, and we did some comparable numbers related to alterations in the previous years, but again, on the actual protection under Part 4 and Part 5 designations, there's been tremendous work that's been done in the last couple of years specifically by this committee.
Thank you. And are you able to answer the question specifically, concerns that the city's procedures only, relating to alteration permit applications are not protecting the city's built heritage as required by the Ontario Heritage Act?
Thank you, and through you, and the clerk can also follow up if John has any other comments, but we did do extensive research going through, looking at the legislative requirements and where each body, being the committee and council, should be making decisions. And as far as staff's concerned, we're doing everything, if not exceeding what the expectations are, excuse me, in terms of the Ontario heritage legislation and related to protecting all of the city's interests related to heritage, and also advancing significant work on its cultural heritage as well.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Paul? Thank you. Okay. Well, I think you'll have more chances. When you get a turn at the debate, you can ask more questions, but let's get into the debate. So Don, you get to speak first.
Yes, thank you. At the end of last meeting, I pointed out that I wanted to propose an amendment to the version of the motion that is now in the agenda package, and that was in response to some feedback that I'd had up to that point, and very likely there will be further amendments, but. For the moment, I think it may be best to proceed with the original motion, even though I want to make some amendments, and other people may want to make amendments, so that we have a kind of general discussion, and then maybe at the end of it, it might be a little bit clearer how the motion should be worded. So I'm going to go ahead with. In the context of the original motion, although perhaps the details aren't the main thing at the moment. So first of all, I think the motion is meant to recognize that the committee is not working, and it's an attempt to prevent it from failing completely. I know many of us have been unhappy and considered resignation, and there have been problems with quorum and so on. So there is I think, a practical problem to deal with. So let me, I could speak at great length, but I'll try to be brief, but I want to cover the main points. First of all, the background. The Heritage Kingston was set up, and at the time it was set up, there was strong opposition from members of the previous Heritage Committee and Museums Committee, saying that it really made no sense to add more responsibilities to the Heritage Committee, which was already fully loaded and which had statutory requirements to take on a whole range of other responsibilities. And basically, our objections were ignored. And but at the same time, it was pointed out that if we weren't happy with the way it was working after a year, then there could be a review. And so I think this is in response to the need for a review. During the first few months of the new committee, some issues about procedures arose, and well, we recognized some problems. There was some hope that changes might happen in response to people at the committee saying or pointing out things that they were concerned with, but they have not happened. There has been no change, no improvement in the procedures that relate certainly to built heritage, which is the main, has been the main activity. So what are the problems? The problems are not the people. I think this committee has very good people. I think our heritage staff are very good people. And I can echo what has already been said. The city has been very good at designating many more properties. They've invested a lot of time, staff, energy, and resources into increasing the number of designated properties in the city. Excuse me. They've established the Heritage Resource Center, which is an excellent thing. They've set up working groups, and my impression is that these working groups are all working very well. So there's a lot of positives that have happened in the last year or so. But I think to me, the important point is that designating properties is not enough. They have to be protected. That's a separate matter, and that's where improvements have to be made, and that's where the problems still exist. The first problem that one might notice is that the Built Heritage Committee, the Heritage Kingston is supposed to have expertise in built heritage. It needs that expertise to deal with heritage alteration permits, which are sometimes very complicated. But the committee only has 3 or 4 such people, whereas 90% of the agenda or more is about built heritage. So they're really not enough of us to really be effective. This shows up particularly in the use of DASH. The DASH program in itself looks good, but if there's only 2 or 3 responses from members of the committee, that's not a good sign. Another symptom, if you like, is site visits. From time to time, there are site visits to various properties. Typically, 1 or 2, sometimes 3 people go to the site visits. So this is really a pretty direct indication that there's a misbalance between the structure of the committee and its function.
Sorry, Don, just point out, that's been 5 minutes, and I will allow multiple rounds, but maybe I'll give you 30 more seconds on this round, and then we'll, as the debate goes, I want to be fair. And at the last meeting, I allowed 10 minutes from the first member of the public, and then everybody else spoke 10 minutes, and it went really long. So we're going to go round by round, 5 minutes each, but I'll give you 30 more seconds.
Well, in 30 seconds, I can't begin to address the main issues. I think that's pointless. I'm disappointed. I wasn't expecting a 5-minute limit.
It's to allow everyone equal time. I'm going to cut each person off at 5 minutes, and then we'll go for another round, and you can have another 5 minutes.
All right. Well, I'll wind up for now. I'll point out that it's unfortunate that 2 of the other built heritage people are not attending today, so I'll try to cover some of the points that they've raised, but I'll leave that for now. And
okay, thank you. Who would like to go next? Councillor Schell.
Thank you. This has been a very interesting motion. So the first thing that I did was think about committees that have been new. And one of them is the Arts Advisory Committee, and I can remember when it was first formed, when the city agreed that there was arts, heritage, and culture and museums within the city of Kingston, because in 2010 there wasn't, within the structure of the city of Kingston. And we had a huge culture plan created that said, one of the items was Kingston Municipal Heritage Committee can be more effective by allowing trained heritage staff to address details of heritage projects while it attends to broader heritage concerns. While it should consider heritage expertise in making decisions, the committee itself should not function as a panel of heritage experts. And that is what I took to heart with the change in mandate of this committee. And one of the items in the mandate was the composition of the committee is, accordingly, Heritage Kingston's membership should possess a diversity of skills, experience, and qualifications, including. It didn't say expertise, it said experience. The Municipal Heritage Committee item in the cultural plan did say expertise, so we could have an argument over words, which I think we might before this morning's over. But it does call from the city for experience. We didn't ask for heritage experts. We used to have a committee that did have people full of heritage experience. We've never had, except when Mr. Zellmer was here, someone on the committee who had degrees in heritage, built heritage. We have not had someone with university degrees. We've had people with great experience, which is what the city has had for many, many years, which is wonderful. We now have a committee that has people with experience, some with great expertise, in the subjects that we have asked as council to be included in this committee, because this council has said they're important. And I think you know that I've said a few of these things before, and I've said them more. It's coming. Well, with this motion, in my opinion, it's here. We have had pushback for the last year about this change in mandate, but we have had a direction of council that includes these two councillors to say we will include museums, and we will include now cultural landscapes, we will include the stories of Kingston. And as a councillor, I feel I must apologize that instead of pushing hard, I've sort of sat back. And now I'm pushing back, because to me, this motion basically says there are some members of this committee that want the built heritage to be looked at harder, that they want to, in a way, go back to when you could sit and discuss applications with the applicant. And even Matt Gervin has said in his item that he has found that it's easier to work with staff under Part 5 designations. As a contractor, designer, agent, it's easier for me to deal with staff directly on Part 5. Mac has even said, as a person who works in heritage, this is working much better for him. So the push on this motion is to go, in my opinion, backward, that even Mac would say no to. And my opinion as a councillor is we have to move forward the way the Arts Advisory Committee did and use the culture plan the way it's supposed to be used, which is to incorporate our culture, museums, heritage, stories, the way they're supposed to be. No more complaining about the agenda, no more complaining about having cultural heritage up high. We've got to move forward the way council has told us to do. This motion, I don't believe, does that at all. The review, I understand why some people think it would, because they're thinking this motion would say, let's talk about cultural heritage and let's talk about landscapes and museums. It doesn't. It says, let's talk about built heritage because we're not happy. And that's a big part of this that I'm hearing, not happy.
That's 5 minutes.
Okay, I will wait for round 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
I fully support and agree with what Liz just said for a few different reasons. First, just from a generic evaluation point of view, you know, it doesn't matter what you do. Build a house, cook a stew, whatever. After you've done it the first time, just go back, look at how is it working, how is it not working in a general sense, look at the objectives, period. However, so that part, I think, just to go through that process of, how's it going so far, I think is a good thing to do. But I agree with Liz. I had no problem with museums and collections and built heritage coming together because it seemed to me like a logical next step to take. And so I walked into this and agreed to participate in this because I thought we would be talking about, the stories of Kingston, how we can include stories not being told. Like, I saw it as a holistic thing. The collections, where the community is and how built heritage, or how we go on to further, expand and engage the community. Like, I expected those types of conversations to happen. And I thought everybody comes with their experience or, knowledge in particular areas, and we have, lots of good experience. I agree, we got great people here, but I also felt like I was walking into a landmine. So not having a previous experience on a city committee, other than the museums and collection, which operate in a totally different way, I felt like I was walking into a battle over just how much discussion there would be getting down to nitty-gritty. Consequently, I've become very disillusioned, and I feel like I spend all my time discussing whether or not this piece of metal is going to be seen from the road or not. To me, I feel like I should be talking about, is every part of our community engaged in heritage? And I don't feel like that's really happening. So that concerns me, and certainly that's where an evaluation of the objectives, are we fully, accomplishing those objectives, and how can we do that? Anyway, I have a couple other points, but I'll save them for my next turn.
Thank you. Paul?
As I said before, I'm fully in agreement that things at times are not working.
Patty, if you just turn off your mic there.
That times things are not working. We do have long meetings. I understand that. I agree with that. I also understand that it's always good to look at what we've done over the past year and are we doing it correctly. But I think, as you mentioned, we are citizens. We are a citizen committee, and we follow direction from council. Council has given us a mandate. So this motion, to me, should read for us to review how we're doing things. Are we doing it within the city's mandate that's been given to us? Not to ask to change the mandate, but to actually, are we doing it in the proper way that the city council has instructed us? As someone that's been on both Heritage Kingston and the Municipal Heritage Committee before, I've learned so much about built heritage. I've learned so much from the experts, Don, Mac, and the other ones. And, I've asked what some people would call silly questions, but I've also been reminded that as a citizen, sometimes you ask questions that the experts take for granted, and it brings to light something. So with that and said, I really truly believe that this still needs to be a citizens committee. I look towards what is said on Dash. I look towards the expertise of Don and Mac, and that when I have a question about built heritage. I also understood that with these new working groups, when we started, they were going to be the experts. They were going to work out what we needed to talk about, bring it to the committee, and then looking at what was presented from the working groups, we were able to say, well, these people are the experts on that field, so I take what they're saying, and I agree with them. Again, I can't see us changing the mandate. We have what we've been instructed by the city council, and for me to review the whole mandate, I don't think works. I think what we need to do is review how we're doing it to match the mandate. I'm also always reminded that without the story behind that stone or piece of wood, it's just a piece of wood. So built heritage needs culture, needs that stories. I just want to try to be polite here, but I do take offense to one of them, whereas says committee members have the interest, or only a minority of committee members have the interest or the expertise to deal with built heritage. While we may not have the expertise to deal with built heritage, we asked to be put on this committee because we're interested in this. So I do believe that all of us do have the interest in built heritage. We just may not have the same level of knowledge of expertise as some. So I'll leave that for now.
Thank you. I don't see any hands, so maybe I'll take a turn if Don, you'd like. Oh, Peter, do you want to go first? All right, you go and then I'll go after you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I seconded this motion because I believe that there is no sin and there is no disrespect and there is no disregard for procedures, all of which in some ways have been implied, but I think to be inherent in this motion. I think that there is no reason not to say, to believe that after a year of a certain amount of frustration and learning, both of them, that there is value in opening the window. We are not proposing as a committee that we do this work or that we provide this evaluation or that we in any sense control this. But I think that it has been a difficult year for a variety of reasons which don't have to be elaborated upon. And the notion that there is nothing to learn by having an at arm's length body take a look at the experience and see if there are things which can be learned, can be adjusted, whatever they might be. And what this motion does is suggest, it seems to me, that they might be in any of a variety of ranges. But to support this motion, I think, is to support the idea that we should learn something from a somewhat difficult and frustrating and also, of course, productive, as has been pointed out, year. And I think that informs the public and it informs us, and we might learn from it. We might be instructed and educated by it in a way that we are not educated and instructed simply by, a kind of fiat. And so I support this, not because I want to impose some kind of legislative apparatus on anybody, but because I think there's something to be learned, and I think we need to learn it, and I think it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to speak.
Yes, you have the floor.
Oh, that's right. Don, sorry, Mr. Vice Chair, you can't take the chair because it's your motion, so I'll go to Councillor Schell, maybe?
I'll take the chair and recognize you.
Okay. So now I'm speaking as a committee member and a member of the community. So I have a couple points, but we'll start with the very biggest one. So to not lose the forest for the trees, let's step back for a moment and just try to imagine what this all means to the average citizen. And let's narrow it down to, for my purposes, the citizens that live in my neighborhood. The citizens that live in my neighborhood, if they haven't chosen specifically to live there because of the heritage that's there, they're at least very accepting of the heritage, the old buildings that are in my neighborhood. I live in the old Sydenham neighborhood. And so there is going to be a passage of time. There is, the building I live in, for example, was built in 1850. So that's 167 years that building has stood there. And it's been tenants recently, but it has had owners in the past as well. Owners might have been there for 20 to 30 years, tenants maybe 2 to 5 years. If you do the math, you realize that there's been probably over 100 people have lived in the house that I live in. So the first thing that you have to acknowledge is that whether you own a heritage building or you're just walking by it and appreciating it, or you're on a walking tour or something like that, it will impact your life. And the ownership of it actually doesn't represent control, it represents respect. So you wouldn't probably own a heritage building unless you understood what you were taking on, and if you did, you might not own it for very long. So what is that? And these are the applicants. These are the applicants that come to our committee. They're people that have taken on the burden of owning a heritage building, and the city doesn't subsidize the work that is required. What we do actually is the reverse. We require an extra level of permitting, right? So you need a heritage permit, which costs money and time. And it can be quite time consuming depending on the situation and the intricacy of the work. So from the point of view of someone who has taken on this burden, we are not actually helping them protect the asset very much at all. And the more we make it difficult for them in the process, the less we're helping them and the less people are going to come forward. So I would say the most common attitude to heritage is, it's great, I love it, it's good for tourism, I like looking at it, as long as I don't have to deal with it. That's what the average citizen is saying, okay? Now, we're different. We have volunteered to help protect the heritage. And for that reason, we have to work together. So this conversation is absolutely valid, because if we're spinning our wheels and getting nothing done, people talking about quitting, that's not productive. That needs to be fixed, absolutely. I would just say, I'll wrap up my segment by saying I agree with the previous speakers. I think we do have consensus in the room that a review is necessary. I think that the motion goes too far in suggesting what the problem is, and I don't think we have consensus on what the problem is. But I think the review is definitely necessary, and as we do that review, if we can't relate it to the average citizen, and if it doesn't increase the likelihood of folks wanting to take on heritage buildings with their own money, then we're not actually protecting heritage. So we got to keep those two aspects in mind as we debate this. Thank you.
Oh, I will pass the chair back to you.
Thank you. There are still two members that have not spoken, Megan and Catherine, if you'd like to take a turn. This is the time. If not, I will move on to the next round. Yes?
I think that there's a disconnect between what this motion is attempting to accomplish and what we actually can do. And so I'm finding that problematic, that we're debating something that seems to me isn't up for debate. So really that's, I think, where my frustration is coming in. I feel that I don't want there to be factions, but I think we need to have more clarity around what we can actually do and move on from that, if that makes sense. That's everything.
Thank you. Catherine?
I do agree with the previous speaker. I think there is a lot of confusion over or between the mandate and the capacity of committee members to actually feel useful in the process. And I think also about the point about how we can be useful to folks who actually have designated buildings and want to make some changes to them. And in that regard, I really feel that we are not using the capabilities of the committee to actually assist them in moving forward with their projects in terms of advice. And I think that one of the frustrations that I find is that I feel very useful when I can actually go on a site visit. I feel that I'm not very useful within the committee. I think back to the LACAC in Pittsburgh Township. And, although there were many problems with that, one of the really useful things about the committee was my capacity as a person who lived in the village to go and ask for advice when I was embarked or hoping to be embarked on a project. And I think that we've lost that. And I think that, that frustrates me. I think it frustrates other people on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. So before we go to a second round, maybe I made the point at the very beginning, the heritage planners and the planning department that review the applications and all the reports flow through them, very integral part of the process. So maybe we could hear from the planning department before we go to the next round about the current state of affairs and the need for a review and perhaps, any other comments they might have.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. From the staff perspective, we've been quite excited, as I was indicating before, about the amount of work that's been achieved in the last couple of years. The excitement that has grown citywide with respect to knowledge and understanding of the importance of heritage, both built and cultural heritage in the city, and the uptake that we see not only in the permits but the grant application program. We've been working through that, and as part of the budget that I've prepared for next year, I've increased that as well, subject to council approval, to $50,000, and that's come directly from some of the feedback we've received from this committee and wanting to support as many people in the community with respect to maintaining their heritage properties. We have a lot of work before us from Kingston Penitentiary and talking about Portsmouth Village for an HCD. We have all of that work in our work plans, as well as dozens of other designations that we have planned in that work going forward. We also have some really exciting work that some of that feedback has come directly through the public process and through this committee, related to the importance of cultural heritage landscapes, and that work is being wrapped into the North Kingstown secondary plan as well. So that will be something that'll come before this committee and again provide an opportunity for the valuable input of the people in this room. From the process perspective, we do have tight timelines related to permitting, but Ryan and Mackenzie always do an excellent job of rising to the occasion and working with property owners to get their alteration permits before this committee and review all the information, set up site visits when they're deemed necessary, and try to involve as many members of the committee that are available, and working with the working groups as well. So from our perspective, we've been quite excited about the work that's been done and feel very optimistic and energized about the amount of commitment in the city. So I think that's a really positive thing. I think we can continue to provide any support that may be required from a technical standpoint on Dash. It's something that, even as staff using the technology every day, it requires patience getting to use the system and to use it most efficiently. But I think we have a process where we're getting those comments in advance, and Ryan can comment on that specifically as a person who receives those, but how invaluable that is to have that information earlier in the process and helping them to prepare what becomes the reports and the recommendations that are before this committee. So from our perspective, we're very positive about the work that the community has done, and specifically this committee, and we're proud of it, and look forward to another couple really busy years with the agendas that we've built and the work plans that we've built.
At the last meeting, we lost quorum before we could get the working group reports, but we did have a really interesting briefing from Dr. Campbell that had multiple questions, and so that's, to me, it was very exciting subject, and there was a lot of uptake with committee members with the questioning. But we didn't finish the conversation, and I guess wanted to bring in Jennifer. Just sort of where you see us going with the conversations around culture, and are we about to embark on some interesting conversations?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. I sort of echo the feelings expressed by the Director of Planning. I think that for culture, it's often a longer process for us. We require, one of the initiatives set out in the transition documents for this committee at the new forum was talking about educating the committee so that it is prepared to do the work that it's mandated to undertake. And as part of that education process over the last year, Cultural Services have offered 14 briefings, information reports included to this committee. And those have included things like Engage for Change, the Archaeological Master Plan for the City of Kingston, which will be up for review, Cultural Heritage Landscapes, which was the topic of the last and most recent, the Commemorations Policy came here, the Lighting Initiative for City Hall, as well as the Cultural Heritage Working Group and the Heritage Assets Working Group doing a lot of the hands-on kind of labor to bring recommendations to this committee to then move to council. And those reports and those briefings, I think it's important that we continue to hold those in the framework of education with the intent to move items of business forward. So the Archaeological Master Plan briefing was a preparatory step because this committee will receive and act as a consultative body on the development of that, the next iteration of that plan. Likewise, we have expertise on this committee, people who have been involved in the past with things like the collections management strategies for the museums, et cetera. And so there's a lot of work that certainly we're staffed, our staff is preparing to undertake. And this committee is an integral part of how we're going to be able to move that, reflect on it, define it, refine it, and move it into council and then into action. So I think that it's been a first year. It's been a needful kind of process in terms of the education of the committee. It's been educational for our staff as well in helping to align our work. And I think that we would echo and mirror the sentiments that have already been offered, that we think there's a lot of work coming for us and that there's, by extension then, a lot of things that will come to this committee. And I just want to reflect and echo some of what Councillor Schell said earlier. The culture plan really does reflect on the concept of tangible, intangible, and natural or environmental, if you will, heritage aspects, and the modern and integrative nature of each of those aspects. So severing or fracturing a committee to separate portions of that definition of culture, from our perspective and from the culture plan's initiatives and then approved through council, is somewhat contrary to modern conservation and heritage practice. Not that we can't delve into them as separate entities, but there is value in the whole. And that value in the whole is certainly what underlines a lot of the work that we will be bringing through the committee in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Ryan.
I think I will say something, Mr. Chair. I too echo what my colleagues have said, and particularly Director Agnew's comments. When I was pulling together some of the numbers that Paige mentioned earlier, it's really quite impressive to look back over the last 5 years and see what we have accomplished. Even since 2013, we've updated we've updated 2 of our existing HCD plans, which is a humongous accomplishment on themselves. We've added Sydenham Ward, which has over 500 properties in it, which is a humongous accomplishment, something that had started decades ago. We've added in the neighborhood of 200 listed properties to the district or to the register, and we're constantly adding Part 4s to the district or to the register all the time. And this year alone, I think it is safe to say we're probably in the neighborhood of a record year for new Part 4s. Currently, I think the numbers were somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, and we have another half a dozen or more to come, and certainly that's something to be quite proud of as far as administration, as far as the role of the citizen group in. When talking to new potential designation owners, we reach out, and you've read it in the reports. Not only send registered mail, so we make sure everybody gets it. We will call them if we can find a phone number. We'll email them if we can find an email. And we've been known, to Mackenzie and I, to actually stop on their doorstep and bang on their door. And talking to these folks, the first thing that they have concerns with is the process that they'll have to go through to make changes. there's a real perception out there that the Kingston Heritage Committee is hard to deal with, that they're hard to get along with, that they put a lot of roadblocks in the way. And and I'm constantly saying, no, they've been changing. They've been, the mandate's been looked at. Their role has been refined so that they look at the bigger picture things, which in my experience is what committee is meant to do, is to not have to deal, as one of the members said, with the little piece of steel that you may or may not see. It's to look at the impact of that change to the community as a whole. And I try to relate that to people when we're talking about adding their properties to the register. Say, if you want to change your roofing, or if you want to do some painting on your property, you'll be dealing with Mackenzie and I. And we like to think we're easy to get along with. And that's about it. It takes about a week and a half to get your approvals, as long as you follow best practices, and we're there to help you, and we're there to direct you to the resource center, which has immense resources for those type of changes. So, and then we always talk about the incentive programs, which we're trying to improve on, so that people can get some help with some of these projects. And those are the biggest carrots, the biggest incentives that we can give people, and for the most part, they're fairly happy to hear that. And I think getting advice when we do circulate to the committee through Dash is a really powerful tool, and getting advice through that program has really helped us in terms of flagging issues that we may or may not have thought of, or that we have thought of but maybe didn't think it was as big a concern as perhaps it is. And getting those issues addressed early, so that when we come to this group with a formal motion saying, please support this alteration, that we've hammered out those details, and that we're at a stage where there's not the need for a lot of detailed digging into things, because a lot of those issues have been hammered out. So that's a huge tool. And the one thing that I think that wasn't touched on is we've made huge strides internally as far as our relationship with other departments. We meet with facilities, we talk with Utilities Kingston, as a heritage group. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the improvements that we've made through education and through the involvement of this committee, as far as meeting with those folks and having them come to the table when they're needed, and talk about their projects. So we've made improvements that way, and I think we can only improve on that. So I'm positive about the strides we've made, and as I said, the numbers speak for themselves, and I'd like to see that we keep going in the right direction and keep council on our side and pushing for heritage conservation, because it really is what makes Kingston Kingston. So I think it's a huge importance.
Thank you. I've a specific question, just for context, because it's in the package. The Kingston Cultural Plan, page 103 has it mentions exactly what the cultural plan says about the Municipal Heritage Committee, and I think it explains a lot of the changes that came our way, and I would like the CAO to address this. The specific question is bringing in the cultural and the museums pieces into and restructuring it as Heritage Kingston with the transition team and all that. Is that a direct result of the Kingston Cultural Plan? And if so, were there any other reasons that because I know you approached me at the very beginning of term as Heritage Chair to explain that to me. Is that where this is coming from the Kingston Cultural Plan?
So through you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to attend the committee meeting and hear the discussion this morning. So the in a more strategic sense, history and heritage fit together. We worked for years to develop a cultural plan that helped to identify not only history and the heritage of Kingston, but also how those stories help to shape the economy of Kingston and the place that we have come to know and continue to foster and grow in a meaningful way as part of developing the community. And so in those early days, as that was unfolding, we recognized that there was somewhat of a disconnect between built form and the history. And part of the cultural plan as it evolved was to help to integrate both those elements so that we would be able to move forward in a way that celebrated both the history and the assets that we have in the community. We then had council adopt that in accordance with the direction that they had previously given. And as a result of that, then needed to have a way to have an oversight committee give direction so that we could move this forward in line with council's vision and in line with progressive future. At the same time, when we reviewed that, part of administration's responsibility is to also go back through and make sure that we're in accordance with legislation. And at that time, we found that there was a bit of a disconnect between some of the ways our practices had been, and we recognized that, and we put that change in place as part of the new mandate. And following the direction, which is my job, when council gives direction to be administered, my job is to make sure it gets administered and to bring strategic oversight in the form of a committee's responsibilities to the operation. And as well, and Ryan touched on this, the integration of works across departments so that we are not operating in silos, we're operating in a collective efficient operation, recognizing that there's always continuous improvement that can be done. And so the bigger picture strategy required us then to merge the two committees that had started out as separate and start to cultivate and build the future of history and heritage under both the built form umbrella in accordance with heritage legislation and the cultural plan direction approved by council.
And so I take it from your comments that you're happy with the direction that we're going in that regard.
So further and through you, you know, there's always going to be startup issues to resolve when you put new groups together. You know, it's not unusual to find you know, the elements of forming and storming and norming and then starting to make some progress. So I think your discussion is useful in trying to help members of the committee understand the big picture today. I think we've been able as staff to present some facts here that demonstrate the success that we're having, and also to give some philosophical vision to how we can move forward in the future by building this harmony. And we have been continuing to make progress on the cultural front. We're not there yet in terms of having implemented that plan, so we need this step to be able to continue to make progress. But you know, the community is a bright light among municipalities. We've had a wonderful growth of identity for heritage properties. We've done a great job of our cultural tourism mandates in a progressive and reasonable way. And we're starting to see some of the tourism elements that places like Quebec City and others have when you start to have vision and integrate both built heritage and historical aspects into the culture of your community.
Thank you. Covering lots of ground. I'm really happy with the way things are going. Before we go to another round of debate, I think it might be appropriate to hear from members of the public. I see there's a couple here. Let them have their say before we go any further. So if you did come to speak on the topic, please come forward, and then we'll have another round of debate.
It's Helen Finley. it's, when I'm sitting back here, I've been an observer for a long time, and I just get the sense that the city is fairly defensive on this and is not really willing to sit down and look and see how it could be made to function better. I have found this committee from an observing standpoint, and I have a fair bit of experience in this, almost dysfunctional. And that is, so I think there may be some solutions. And I'm sitting here and thinking, one, I hear it's quite wonderful what the working committees are doing. And they didn't exist for a long time. And they are developing. And I have the privilege of serving on the Heritage Properties Research or Working Group. And I have said a couple of times, this is one of the best committees I have served on. It's productive, we work hard, and we have Ryan guiding us in this, and it is really excellent. And so I thought, why couldn't you have a Built Heritage Working Group that would meet regularly? And that may be a way of solving some of the problems, because I'm also concerned about volunteers, because I see sometimes half the committee sitting here and it's not their area of interest really. So, and many of the volunteers, of course, are working, and they're taking time off work to come here. And so if a meeting goes on, then that's problematic. And as far as the business about the review, I heard from the city clerk and from Councillor Schell, both, that there will be a review. In fact, I believe, and I was at council, although it's not in the minutes, that a review in a year was what was sort of part of this. And it's good to review things. And I just can't imagine the committee going on this way, because I know, for instance, that to try and get an architect to serve on this committee, they won't. They just do not want to. And so that's back from quite a while ago. It's not something that's new with this new committee. And so you're going to get people who don't really understand or care or have the knowledge to deal with the built heritage. And someone suggested, well, if it's a little detail about something, that's not important. And I have to tell you, as the owner of heritage properties and the restorer of them, details are extremely important. You can't do a proper job. And we're not doing the job for the tourists, please. There's something to me that says our heritage is valuable in and of itself. And if there are people, and I moved into Sydenham District in 1963, and it was a slum, if there are people who are willing to invest privately into restoring and keeping our heritage, then they should be encouraged, and they should do it properly. What I see a lot of times, this is just an example, is people doing a repair, rotted wood, they're doing the repair, and they haven't figured out that they need to do the gutters first, because they're going to be back in 2 years dealing with rotten wood again. And I know that may not sound interesting for culture and so on, but it is important. And I think that the best combination is the professional staff working with people who have that experience and knowledge, and to be helpful as a team. I don't find that it's working as a team. And it doesn't need to have the committee members who are, the main interest is the stories and so on. So for that reason, I think oh, and just one other thing. I think the process in getting going here, I was attended the transition team meetings as a member of the public. And I actually had a phone call that said to me, they don't want the public there. So could you please not come? Well, I said, I'm sorry. This meeting does not come under the 2 or 3 things you can have a closed meeting, and so I feel I have every right to be there. If you want to throw me out, then you can do that. But that gave a very strange message to me. I also had a strange message when, as an applicant quite recently, here with my architect, I was told he couldn't speak to it, and I couldn't speak to it. They later said, oh, you can speak as a member of the public, not as an applicant. Well, people start to not trust the city, and that's, I think, a really negative thing. So I would like to just leave you with that one suggestion that a Built Heritage working committee, or not working group, might be something to consider. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public that wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll go back to debate. Second round, you have 5 minutes each. Who would like to go first? Go ahead, Don.
Kind of difficult to respond to other comments. I'll try to cover some points. I mentioned before difficulties with procedures, and I think Helen Finlay just pointed out or reminded us that alterations, renovations are tricky things, are complicated things. They need to get the people applying need good advice, and in order to get that kind of advice, you need interaction between the owners, the city staff, and knowledgeable people with real experience in heritage renovations, architects, tradespeople, contractors, and so on. And that's what we've lost in the new structure. As Helen said, the committee is no longer allowed to ask questions of applicants, and in a simple way. That kind of interaction is not happening. The public needs expert help, and we have good heritage people, but they are not architects, they are not builders. They need that kind of input as well. So, and that's what we've had in the past. I realize sometimes people have difficulty with that, but the average person, the owner of a heritage property, is really at the mercy of a builder that comes in and tells them what's wrong and what needs to be done. Because most builders, tradespeople, don't really have experience in heritage work, and the default is to tear it out and replace it all, because they know how to do that, and they know it'll be good, and so that's what they're going to do. So that's why you need to have this kind of dialogue between owners and knowledgeable people. So one of my major problems in the last few years has been the use of delegated authority. I was on the committee when the delegated authority bylaw was discussed and approved. We approved that, or recommended that, in good faith for minor alterations. It's being used for major alterations, quite against the advice and practice of that's expected under the Ontario Heritage Act. I'll just give one example. I could give many. 7779 Gore Street is an old stone double house that's currently being renovated. It had been neglected for many years, and now it's undergoing a major renovation. Complete repointing, new windows, new doors, new roofing, new dormers, new porch. That has been approved under delegated authority, and the committee heard nothing about it, nothing. I had the opportunity to visit it the other day, and I discovered original 6/6 windows, which were being planned to be replaced. That's against our windows policy. So, I mean, that's just one example of the necessity to have a complete interaction of expert, knowledgeable people directly with the owners. And Dash has been good, but again, we're isolated from the owners. I asked a couple of times, please, when we're using Dash, can we see the input from the owner? What are their problems? What are they trying to achieve? We do not see that. All we see is staff comments. It can be made to work, but these are little things that are preventing this committee from functioning well. And the effect of it is that those of us who have this expertise, who have some useful things they can do, are not able to do it. So they're being asked to come to the committee and not able to interact with the applicants.
45 seconds.
Okay, and then look at the agenda items that were on our last meeting. The agenda items that we discussed. Some were gardening, landscaping, accessible entrance, signage. None of them are fundamental. They're all peripheral to the built heritage that we are supposed to be protecting. So why should these people like Mac and Sherman come here to spend their time dealing with things? They're not trivial, but they're not the important things. They don't want to give up their valuable time to deal with that. So they're not going to come if the committee persists in this way. So I guess I don't want to imply that if this working group is set up and does its business, it might come back and say, it's okay, let's just carry on, or just a tweet here and a tweet there. It doesn't have to be a major renovation, but it needs to be looked at, and it needs to be looked at by people who are involved with heritage if it's going to work in an efficient way. I should have mentioned when we were talking about these so-called minor items that some of those probably could be handled without coming to the committee. If we had our procedures looked at in a sensible way, things like signs and accessible entrances could be dealt with without debate at this committee. So, I think our procedures have big problems, and we need to look at them from scratch. Thank you.
Thank you. So just refocus as we go along here. There's a motion in front of us. The part that it goes to council. Council has to approve it for it to have any meaning. The be it resolved, starting with a be it resolved, that and all the way down to the end of the motion is what's actionable. So maybe we could look at that and try to decide if you like it or don't like it, because that's what we're voting on, and we're moving towards a vote now. So maybe try to keep your comments very focused to the specific clauses that come after there for be it resolved. Did you have it? Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to get to it because we're now back in the weeds. And this is kind of what has been happening for the last number of meetings. Is something major? Is it minor? If it's minor, it's really important. You shouldn't ignore it. You must deal with, we could get into the weeds forever on built heritage. But what we are being asked to do is resolve that Heritage Kingston recommends City Council direct staff to undertake a review of everything about this committee. It says a review of the composition, mandate, and procedures. And then it says who the committee should be, the review to include the following components. So this is what this committee is suggesting to council should happen. That the review would be to hold one or more open meetings where members of the public and representatives are invited to make presentations and provide input, I presume, to this review committee. It doesn't actually state it, but to this review committee. It says, and provide input, so then I put about what. We know that 2 and 3 are already done. So really, this review committee would receive all that information because it's already done. And then, so really, it's provide input to recommend procedures for dealing with heritage permit applications for properties designated under Part 4 and Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act, including procedures for approval under delegated authority. So that's, we want this committee, the motion says we want the committee to discuss delegated authority, which we have a lot of in the City of Kingston. This isn't just this committee. We give delegated authority to staff for all kinds of things, thank God, because they are the experts. And we have said, in your expert opinion, as a staffer who is going to be in deep trouble if something goes wrong with this, because let's not forget that when you're a staff member, when we're committee members, we don't get in deep trouble when there's a mistake. Staff members do. So it says procedures for approval under delegated authority to allow more efficient time utilization for both heritage staff and committee members. Basically, that's what they are asked to provide input in the long run that allow more efficient time utilization for both heritage staff and committee members. That's pretty vague, really vague. And as we've seen in this discussion, we could do this forever. So I certainly can't recommend this. I wouldn't be moving in agreement with this. And yes, when I talked about the idea of a review, it's more in just what I said. We're not following the culture plan in this committee. We're not following regular procedures in terms of built heritage, because we do wind up in the weeds in a regular way. I don't think that people understand DASH and its power. This becomes part of a record, and we don't even go into that in this. DASH becomes part of the legal record, so that if something goes to the OMB, which it did for Green Bay Road, the DASH comments were part of the legal record. What we talk about here isn't. So the motion as written really does nothing to move forward what I care about, which is that we as a committee are to discuss cultural heritage and our heritage assets, which we didn't own till a few years ago. The Pump House Steam Museum, McLaughlin Woodworking were run by volunteers. Now we have professionals running them. Now it's our responsibility as a city in this committee to be part of that oversight. We're not dealing with it. We have a whole commemoration strategy that is going to be coming down on us hard in a little while. We need, as a committee, to be understanding what our mandate is and to do our mandate. I believe built heritage is being well looked after by a professional staff. If we were in the broad sense doing our job, in my opinion, when I went to a site visit at 488 Division Street, I'd be going out of my mind right now. But as a committee, we haven't been moving forward on like big picture items, which is what we're supposed to do. So yes, I would like to arrange as councillors that we do what we're supposed to do, which is reflect a broad range of community perspectives, broad array of opportunities and projects presented to the public. I think we do have to get a corporate heritage strategy master plan, but that's got to come down the pipe. But this as presented, and if I say this to council, that this is what this motion is supposed to do, they'll say no. You just want to have more efficient time, in the long run, basically what it says, more efficient time utilization for both heritage staff and committee members. And they'll say, well, then do it. You don't need a massive review of staff and people to do this. Just do it.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Paul.
Part of me last time we deferred this was hoping to have conversation with everybody in the committee, and unfortunately, some people couldn't make it, and they've made comments. I appreciate Ms. Finley's comment, and I think it's important to realize that we're here to guide the public, as Don said, and offer that guidance, and if we can't offer that guidance to them, maybe we're not doing it right. And maybe that's why we need this review. Earlier on, timing was an issue, Wednesday mornings, and everybody has to go to work on Wednesday afternoon. Maybe that's where we look at, where people can stay longer to finish things. All of this said here, I think the only things we can actually action, because the City Council has given us a mandate, is the number one is to ask the public, similar to what Ms. Finley has done, is give us guidance. Are we doing it right? Where can we, improve on that? And where can we, as a committee, better utilize our time? I think that's the only two portions of this actions we can look at. The rest is actually, it's almost, you're telling the review committee what you want to hear them come up with. To me, a proper review is to say, look at what we're doing, find out how we can do it better, and come back with recommendations. It may be 2 and 3 may be recommendations, but we can't tell them to do that, that we want that. I think that a review has to be more open so that it can come back to us and say, well, you guys are doing a great job, and yeah, you can tweak it here and there, but you're overall doing a great job. I still think that built heritage has to have the culture component, and the culture component has to have built heritage. You can't separate those two. And it's sad that some people in the built heritage think that culture is overtaking, culture is being more, but if you look at our agendas, a good portion of it is built heritage, and we do get that done. I don't know how to tweak it. I like to hear what Don's revised motion may be. Maybe it would be what I'm thinking before I suggest any other differences.
Okay, well, on that last point, we can only discuss what's in front of us here. We have to deal with this first. I think we all received the revised motion by email, at least I did. It's rewritten, but it contains many of the same elements of this motion, but it doesn't matter. We can't speak to it right now. We can only speak to this one in particular. I wanted to ask a question of legal staff before we go any further regarding a comment from a member of the public. So Ms. Finley mentioned, and this came up during the transition discussions, the possibility of having the built heritage, such as the heritage permit applications, going to a working group first for the nitty-gritty discussion of the details of the application and how to. And I understand that Mr. McLeod already spoke to this in the past, saying that the heritage legislation doesn't allow for that type of ad hoc discussion because it's in the legal chain or something like that. If you could maybe answer the question about that. Could we potentially set up, and what are the legal challenges to setting up a working group that looks at the built heritage applications, like the heritage permit applications?
Through you, Mr. Chair. As was mentioned by the clerk earlier, legal was involved in the considerable review of the legislation, as well as the processes that needed to be adopted to ensure we were in compliance with the legislation. So I would say that that review has put us to where we need to be in terms of our process. We did spend a lot of time looking at clearly understanding the law, looking at its application, looking at how it's been used and applied, and the process that we came up with was consistent with that. And that's why it took so long to ensure we put the right tools in place. So I think that would be my submission, that we're doing what we need to do in compliance with the law.
Thank you. Okay, so there may be more debate, but I'm going to call a quick recess for washroom break. Don, did you have something pressing to say?
No, I was just going to suggest a recess, partly because of this proposed amendment. I might, Peter and I might look at it and think of other amendments, and so if we had a few minutes to look at that.
Okay, so why don't we take a 10-minute recess then and give you a chance to work on that as well? Yes, Paul.
I appreciate that you're saying we're doing what we need by legal, but my only question is, are we doing what the public needs? Can we tweak that to Ms. Finley says there's some barriers, and Don's mentioned it too. So even though we're doing what we're legally supposed to do, are we able to look at it so we can better serve the public?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Our review of the legislation is to ensure we're in compliance. There may be many instances, if you look at the law, where a member of the public may not agree with the interpretation of the law and how it applies. I understand that can be challenging, but we need to ensure we're in compliance with the law. That's our obligation as the City of Kingston in terms of what we need to do. And so that becomes a very important part of our compliance regime.
Okay, so I'm going to call a 10-minute recess. We'll reconvene at 11:15. Okay, so we took a recess, and we've heard in the second round from Dawn, Liz, and Paul. I asked a few questions as well. Does anyone else here have anything to say, or before we're getting to the point of almost we're ready to vote on the motion? So I see a member of the public wants to speak, so please come forward.
Thank you, Peter. Peter Gower, Kingston. Just briefly, I'd like to pick up on a comment that Don made when he said there used to be the interaction between many qualified people. And a lot of these committee members will not have seen that. But I can assure you that an applicant came here with ideas for the Renaissance Event Centre, which you probably know up on Queen Street, with the intent of making it look rather like a Gothic cathedral. And there was horror sitting around this table. And two of the committee members took a piece of paper, and while he was talking and presenting that plan, redesigned what is there now. And that's the sort of level of discussion that used to be here, which I have just missed in the years since this became more of a diffuse committee. I'm also concerned in the concerns that in resolution number 2 to evaluate the city's current procedures, claiming that that's wrong, because I think you have to constantly look at current procedures. They change. Just because they were okay in 2015 doesn't mean to say they're necessarily okay now. And we can take as an example what legal has said, that in 2015 they read through the Heritage Act and said that everything that they recommended was right. If the changes were right, it honestly meant that everything that we did between 2005 and 2015 was wrong, because we were not correctly following the Ontario Heritage Act. So I think current procedures constantly have to be looked at. You change without even realizing, and I'd like to see Shirley Bailey's survey of other municipalities redone to see what they are now doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. For those who do not recognize, Mr. Gower was at one point sitting in this chair as the chair of the Municipal Heritage Committee in a previous term. So he speaks from experience. Any members who have not spoken in the second round, do you wish to speak? Okay, so Don, did you wish to speak?
Yes, as I mentioned, my colleagues and I have been considering revising the motion, partly on the basis, well, we recognize some of the shortcomings or of the original motion, and we also want to respond to a number of concerns that were raised today. I think we had a good discussion today, and you know, I have a lot of sympathy with some of the points that were raised. But I think there is a consensus that the committee cannot continue in exactly the same way without change. But I think we need a bit more time to think about how we need to make a review and where that review should lead us. So I've decided that I'd like to withdraw the motion, and Peter Goheen has agreed to that.
Peter, you as seconder, you okay with withdrawing the motion?
I think it's entirely appropriate, yes.
Thank you.
And
yes?
Before very long, I hope to come back with a new motion that I think may be more acceptable to other members of to all members of the committee, and hopefully to staff as well. Thank you.
So, yes, you have permission to withdraw the motion. Thank you. So that's gone. As far as another similar motion goes, I know Peter and myself currently can't attend October 3rd. So you can submit a new motion anytime, but if you submit it for October, there may not be full uptakes. Consider submitting for November, and then give staff lots of notice so that they have it and we have it for November, and then hopefully we can find consensus. To me, it's about finding something that we all can live with, and that's what we'll hopefully be looking at next time. So with that, there's no more items of business. So there is some items of correspondence. I'm sure you all saw the 3 letters from Mr. Gervin, Mr. Hill, and Miss Mackenzie Nish even, with her new baby. She even wrote to us. So that's 3 of the missing members today. So other than that, I need, the next meeting is October 4th. As I said, I will not be here unless I can switch my hospital schedule. In November, the meeting is the 3rd Wednesday in November, whatever date that is. Okay? So I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Catherine. All those in favor? And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.